I want to take you back to 1882, to Central California, where under a rain-drenched tent, a young man all of 27 years old was sitting at a camp meeting. He was the son of a well-known Seventh-day Adventist preacher, but he himself had never really been converted. He had just left medical school, and his life was lacking a little direction, but all that was about to change. In fact, not only was his life about to change, but the whole trajectory of Seventh-day Adventism. But first, I want to take you somewhere else, 2,300 miles away to Battle Creek, Michigan, where a few months before, Ellen White sat by the bedside of her dying husband, James. She was obviously distraught. They had been married for some 40 years, and she was about to lose her partner. But there was something else that was bothering her even more. You see, just a short time before, James had come to the conclusion that they should move to California, where they could slow down and just write about the story of redemption. You see, James had realized that over his whole ministry, over his whole life, he had worked so hard as the editor of the Review and Herald, as the General Conference president, but there was a key ingredient missing. In fact, the key ingredient. He expressed this in print in the Review when he said these words, "With some there is an unutterable yearning of soul for Jesus," and then he said, "and the writer is one of this class." You see, James realized that Jesus was missing from his ministry. And so he made it a burden where wherever he preached from that point on, he would lift up Jesus. In fact, that's exactly what he did. As one person later said, reflecting on his life, that everywhere he went, he lifted up the story of redemption. Well, unfortunately, before they made it to California, James did take ill, and so there he was on his bed about to die. Ellen White was distraught, not only that he was going to die, but that she was losing her partner in the gospel, because she too had come to the conviction that Adventism was missing that ingredient. In fact, she said many times that Seventh-day Adventists were preaching Christless sermons. So as she sat there by his bedside, weeping and sobbing over her loss, unsure of what would happen in the future, she all of a sudden got this impression from God, and he said to her, "The workmen are buried, but I am raising up other young men, other young workmen." So she took that and she comforted herself with that thought. Well, not long after James died, Ellen White decided she would go, in fact, to California, where she would spend her ministry writing and lifting up Jesus. Unfortunately, she took ill herself. But as she got out there, there was, in fact, a camp meeting going on there in Healdsburg, just a few steps away from her house. And so she actually requested, even though she was sick, that she be carted down every night to that camp meeting, where they set her up on a couch on the stage. Well, that first night, she decided that she wanted to say a word, and so she urged her son and urged a woman to help her up, and they brought her up to the podium, and she stood there, and she looked like death. In fact, she later reflected, saying that she was fully convinced that this would be her farewell speech. As people watched her, she was just pale white. She looked like death. There was no life in her. And then all of a sudden, something happened. It was like a light switch was turned on. People visibly saw the life coming back to her face. They saw the pink returning to her cheeks. And right then and there, she was revived, and she began to preach the message of the boundless love of Jesus. Well, that young man who I opened up by telling you about, he was there in the audience, just sitting there, not really with any direction. And as he saw Ellen stand up, he later reflected, saying that she was lifting up the message of his grace, the message of God's grace. And right there, something amazing happened. That young man was given a revelation of Jesus. Explaining some 20 years later, he said to Ellen, it was like the heavens were departed. He lost sight of all that was going on in the tent, and the heavens were parted, and there he saw, lifted up in heaven, the crucified Christ. And he said he realized for the first time that Jesus was crucified for him, that God loved him personally. He said it was all for me. And that was the turning point in his life. The whole trajectory of his life changed because he fell in love with Jesus right then and there. Well, that young man named Elliot, he went on to become the editor of Signs of the Times, along with another young man who had a similar experience with Jesus, Alonzo T. Jones. They went on to have an amazing ministry where they lifted up Jesus, and they lifted up the matchless charms of Jesus along with Ellen White. Well, there was something else that happened that was quite interesting. Elliot realized that as he was studying Scripture, all of Scripture testified of Jesus. There was not a single page, there was not a single chapter that was devoid of Jesus. And so he said he resolved that day that in all of his study of the Bible, he would look for Jesus from Genesis to Revelation, from start to finish. Well, I've written a new book called There's More to Jesus. And in this book, I have taken up that mantle that so burdened Ellen White, that so burdened James White, that burdened this young man, Elliot Wagner, that burdened his partner, Alonzo T. Jones. And I have in this book sought to lift up Jesus in such a way that reveals all aspects of his character and life. All aspects of who he is from Genesis to Revelation, from creation to redemption and everything in between, to his birth and his life and his death and his resurrection and his ministry right now in the heavenly sanctuary. And so I've sought to do that in this book. I hope that you will give it a chance, that you will pick it up, that you will read it, that you will be blessed by it. I'm excited about it. I have felt so blessed as I have gone through it, and I've written it, and I've had this one singular goal to lift up Jesus. I hope you will take a look at it, and you will be blessed by it as well, because there is indeed more to Jesus. There is ever more to learn of him.